Welcome everyone to MASS MoCA's YouTube channel. I'm Susan Cross, Senior Curator of Visual Arts and also the curator of the exhibition ERRE, Them and Us, ELLOS Y NOSOTROS. We're having this exciting panel tonight with the artist ERRE and his two brothers. Thank you for being here. Nearly 2 years ago, when ERRE was here first installing the exhibition, he had this wonderful idea to have a public conversation with his two brothers, both of whom also engage with the border in their work. So I'm excited just to let them talk, but first let me introduce them. Of course, Marcos Ramirez, known as ERRE, needs little introduction. Hopefully you've seen the exhibition. If not, it's up until October 24th. You'll see glimpses of it tonight. Marcos lives in the Tijuana San Diego region. He studied at the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California. And interestingly, I always like to say this little tidbit, he graduated with a law degree and later worked in the construction industry to support his visual art practice. He's been the subject of a number of solo exhibitions at MoCA San Diego, the Museum of Latin American Art Long Beach, too many to name really, and has participated in group exhibitions at the Oceanside Museum of Art, Today Art Museum Beijing, the site Santa Fe, and really one of the most important where I first saw his work, the Insight in 1997 and then in 2000 in the San Diego Tijuana border region. Then his youngest brother, Omar Pimienta, is an artist, writer, and scholar who lives and works also in the San Diego Tijuana border region. His artistic practice examines questions of identity, transnationality, poetics, landscape, and memory. He has a PhD in literature and an MFA in visual arts from UC San Diego, as well as a BA in Latin American Studies from San Diego State. He's published 4 books of poetry and has won a poetry award from Malaga, Spain, the Centro Cultural Generación. And he's also exhibited his work at MoCA Tucson, Arizona, the biennial with the El Paso Museum of Art, Oceanside Museum of Art, and so many more. Last but not least, Juan Carlos Ramírez-Pimienta is a teacher and scholar at San Diego University, Imperial Valley, and his research focuses on Mexican and Chicano popular culture, especially poetics and border cultural and literary studies. Dr. Ramírez-Pimienta has published over 50 scholarly articles and book chapters and is the author of 4 books. His research topics relate to the US-Mexico border folklore and particularly on narcoculture. And he's been featured in dozens of international media outlets such as the New York Times, USA Today, Univision, NPR, Al Jazeera, Le Monde, and the BBC. So you can see from those actually shortened bios that we're going to have a really interesting conversation about how these 3 brothers have all been informed by where they've grown up and where they live and practice their artistic and academic studies focusing on the border. They'll give a presentation and then we'll have a conversation and questions, but I'm going to hand it over to Marcos Ramirez, known as ERRE. Thank you.
Bueno, good to have you all here. I'm going to try to give a brief introduction of our family and the context and how we actually arrived to the Tijuana San Diego border region. So it all started in a small little town named Tecolotlán, Jalisco, where my father and my mother were born, one in 1929, the other one in 1933. But they both migrated to the north and to the San Diego, Los Angeles area, my father in 1951, around 1951. And then my mother later on, like in around 1955 to Tijuana, San Diego too. The idea for my father, who was a projectionist, movie projectionist 4 years before, from 14 to 19 years old in Jalisco, in a cinema, there was a rural cinema. His idea to come to the north was a very interesting approach of trying to come, but to work in the Hollywood industry and then become involved in the cinema. That was his main idea. So he comes to California. He gets in a little trouble, and eventually, after a little bit of problems, he is deported back into Tijuana. Mr. Marco Ramirez, then he settles it there in Tijuana, and he starts bringing all his family. And eventually he meets my mother, who lives in Tijuana and works in San Diego and in La Jolla area as a maiden, helping people in their homes. And then eventually, since they meet there in Tijuana and my father is forced to stay there for 5 years, they started dating and eventually they get married and then created a family. This is the state of the border back in those days, in the 50s and 60s. And in those years is when I was born in 1961. This is my father, Marcos, around 1955. And then we suspect, because we were never told exactly what's going on with this photograph, but we suspect that he was like dressed to take like for a photograph for him to apply for or send his information to a movie office or something. And this is my mother, Sarah, back in 1958, around those years. They get married in a double wedding, but we are just showing here their photograph, my father and my mom, 1959. And this is my sister. I think we went one more. Yeah, okay. First, then in 1961, I was born. It's me with my little brother, Juan Carlos, who is 2.5 years younger than me. Then the next image is my mom with Nora Teresa Ramírez-Pimienta, who is 9 years younger than me. And then this is a family photograph. And around 1977 in Tijuana, in the house that my father built in Colonia Libertad. That's my mom, my father, myself, my brother Juan Carlos, and my little sister Teresa. And eventually the poet arrived. That's Jorge Omar Ramírez-Pimienta, who was born 17 years after myself. And then we have an image here, an important one, an image of Tijuana San Diego. In the left side of your screen is San Diego, the United States, and in this right side is Tijuana, is the city just like almost collapsing against the fence, like trying to get across, but it's impossible. The hill in the back, that's our neighborhood, Colonia Libertad. We were born 7 blocks apart from the fence, and in this image we have a look of the original border, not the original, but the original fence that was started to be built in 1991. That red mark that is over there, and lately it's been transformed into a different thing. But we have this other image here of Pat Nixon, and I assume it's in the 70s. That kid over there is not Omar, even though it has the same haircut, but that man over there is not my father. But you can see there that the fence between the two nations in those times was this barbed wire fence, and it was completely easy to come across. The location where they are right there is still called Friendship Park, and is in the corner of Latin America where the Pacific Ocean and Mexico in the corner hit the border with the United States. And that was there back then, up to the 80s, 85, the fence wasn't like this, almost up to the 90s. And the last image is the way the fence between Mexico and the United States looks today. And then this is an image of the road between Tijuana and Tecate, Baja California. This fence that marks the landscape, it goes for miles and miles and miles. Now, this is like the context where we live all our lives. And then my brother Omar is going to take over and was going to start talking about, or Juan Carlos, I guess, is talking about their own work.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank MASS MoCA for the opportunity to present for the first time as a group, as family members, and Susan, of course, for making this possible. I'm going to start with the foreign club. My section is going to kind of focus on Colonia Libertad, which is the neighborhood in which we were born. The foreign club was the American-owned racetrack, horse racetrack, and can you spin the next slide, please? It was built near the Tijuana River, and the Tijuana River every decade or so overflows. So it destroyed it a couple of times, and it was rebuilt a couple of times. And the stables where the horses were living, once the foreign club was settled, reconstructed in another area, were left behind, and the workers of the racetrack in that little square area there was left behind. So the workers organized themselves and occupied the land. There was a reaction from the owners of the racetrack. There was an actual gunfight to try to take them away from the land, and the Mexican government had to interfere. The land was eventually granted to the workers, and Colonia Libertad was founded by the workers. This is 1929. The racetrack, as you can see here, was relocated. Eventually, that turned into Casino Aguacaliente, a bigger industry, and Tijuana was born as this space mostly owned by American citizens. 90% of the structures from 1917 to like 1929 was owned by US citizens, and obviously the workers were mostly Mexican. Colonia Libertad was one of the three first neighborhoods to be founded. They were founded at the same time by a league of workers. And next slide, in 1930, the Great Depression hits, and it is estimated that there's different numbers, 250,000 in the lower range, up to 4 million Mexican Americans and Mexicans were deported. And it's a big number. It is estimated that about half, if not more, of the people that were deported in that big move were actually born in the US. And then Tijuana grew exponentially since, I would say, I don't know, maybe 100,000, if not more, were actually deported to Tijuana, and just they figured they would start their life in the Mexican side of the border. The neighborhood started growing. Next slide, please. And this is a picture from the highest part of the neighborhood. As Marcos mentioned, this is how it looks. I guess this picture is about 2 years old or 3, and these are the new fences. Next slide. That's the one fence that Marcos mentions, that it was built in late 80s, early 90s. And that's the fence that I grew up with. And Marcos pretty much grew up with 3 barbed wire cables. And it is really, to me, really interesting in how in a couple of generations, we just have fortified this division. Next slide. I want to stress the relevance of Colonia Libertad in my work because, first of all, because of Marcos. I mean, I was born there, and I didn't really grew up thinking that it was normal to live in a space that was divided, that was physically limited from, I don't know, a soccer or a baseball going over the fence could be a big issue. In the year 2000, Marcos was selected for the Whitney Biennial. And I asked him, Marcos, like, how does it feel that you're in the Whitney Biennial, being someone from, trans-border, but from Tijuana? And he said, well, I was really happy, but I was installing my flag, and I saw Salomon Huerta go by. And the year 2000, there were like 5 artists with Latino surname in the list of artists, of invited artists. Salomon Huerta, Big Muniz, Lutzka Mitzer, I can't remember the other 2 or 3. But he told me, I was not just the only Mexican-American in the show. I wasn't also the only one from Tijuana. And even worse, I wasn't the only one from Colonia Libertad. And he pointed out that this I didn't know, that Salomon Huerta's family was also from the neighborhood. And that kind of blew my mind. It made me think how powerful a region could be, that it could create the need for people to express themselves. Of course, Salomon Huerta has a different experience in life. I would assume he migrated to Los Angeles being really young, but there was something within that logic, within that reality of having 2 people from the same neighborhood being so successful in one of the most prestigious biennials in the US, most prestigious one. Not far, I guess a couple years before that, Carlos, my brother, invited me to interview the author of many of the songs by Los Tigres del Norte. Enrique Franco was the author of songs like América, Tres Veces Mojado, many of the hit songs by Los Tigres del Norte, which it's a band that's celebrated for narcocorrido, but also for corridos by migrants. Next slide, please. Enrique Franco was also from Colonia Libertad. So I started trying to make these links, like how is it that these individuals from this specific neighborhood that have been limited in their capacity to traverse, but at the same time not limited, since they lived and grew up in a specific era in which the border was a really porous space. Next slide. I'm gonna read a poem from my first book that it was published early in the 2000s, and it's titled Mid-80s. In the mid-80s, my family bought new china, old gold trim and busy florals. We never ate together. Back then, I wore camouflage from boots to beret, collected baseball cards like a junkie, watched cartoons with blind faith. My brother Marcos built houses at the other side, 8 hours a day for $500 a week. My sister Teresa curled her hair and lined her eyes like Madonna, whose albums she never bought. She listened to El Andariego while filling her diary, pages faintly printed with clouds and landscapes. Don Marcos lost a finger to a machine working for US elevators. My brother Carlos hid his books beneath the seat while crossing to school with a Mexican passport. My mother read Hola magazines so she could tell us all what was happening to the royal family, to Julio Iglesias. And she would always finish saying, those poor Kennedys, they're cursed. Next slide. This is my father, and as Marcos mentioned, he came to the U.S. trying to find the American dream in Hollywood, and overstayed his visa, came back as a bracero, overstayed again, got deported. So this is a poem that talks a little bit about that. My father's name was Prisciliano Gil Bautista, Indiana, 1931, Tijuana, 1957. My father's name is Marco Ramirez Lopez, Jalisco, 1929. Official documents, papel picado by time, signatures, lines that travel on a roller coaster. Prisciliano Gil Bautista worked with the body, Marco Ramirez Lopez. Marco Ramirez Lopez worked with the name Prisciliano Gil Bautista. Marcos bought an identity. Prisciliano donated a social organ wrapped in papel picado. My father remembers the last name of the immigration officer, Cruz. What's your name? Prisciliano Gil Bautista, officer. No, Prisciliano Gil Bautista is dead. Now I wonder if my father died a little in that other body. Next slide. This is another poem. It's a dialogue with my father. Don Marcos, did you always use the baseball cap? Yes, son. What I rarely used was my head. Don Marcos, how many times did you get deported? Once or twice? You lost track, Don Marcos? My son, I lost everything. Next slide. So these two last poems are from this book, Album of Fences, translated by my friend Jose and published by Cardboard House Press. Next slide. And I'm gonna talk just briefly, and it'll be maybe 2 minutes about this specific project. I got so invested in Colonia Libertad that I figured that I would create my own post-nation, proto-nation. I still trying to figure out. So I go around museums and galleries, and I have created a passport of Colonia Libertad. People come by to my embassy and apply for their citizenship. So it's a performatic piece that's also kind of bureaucratic. I call bureaucratistic. People that come in to apply and they take their passport, they also have to leave behind their old passport. So it's this negotiation between me and the person that wants the passport. So people take an artist piece for free, but they have to leave behind a document that's usually sentimental and many times with political value. Most of them are voided, but even then people have like their visas and their trips and so many memories of pretty much the privilege of traveling. The passports that I keep, I frame and I utilize. I put them up on walls. So usually people come and are able to look at people that have pretty much donated or given up their citizenship to obtain the citizenship of Colonia Libertad. You're welcome to apply. There is an online application. And I guess I'll stop right there and let Juan Carlos continue. Thank you.
Many thanks for this invitation to reflect on the work of Marcos ERRE and how it has influenced mine, and in general terms, how it intersects with my own intellectual preoccupations. Being siblings, Marcos, Omar, and I, we all share a common origin. We are ineluctably border creatures, born and raised less than 1 mile from the international border. As a matter of fact, our street's very identity was conceived in relationship with the international boundary. Our street, 10th Street, was referred to as such because it is located 10 blocks away from the international border. The street has in fact an official name, Gabriel Hernandez, who I believe was a little known general in the Mexican Revolution, but everybody calls it Calle 10, 10th Street. And it was not a sort of nickname or colloquial name. It was the official designation used for postal purposes. In fact, it took me many years to understand that our colonia, our neighborhood, existed in correlation and because of the United States. That is the origin of our colonia, and in fact, that is the origin of our city, Tijuana. Founded as a border town in response to the needs and sometimes the urges of the population of Southern California. Tijuana's economic and demographic boom came with the implementation of the Volstead Act, the dry law from 1919 to 1933. It is in this context that Colonia Libertad was founded in 1930. About this, my brother Omar has reflected extensively, as we have just seen and heard. When I became a literary and cultural critic, I guess it made sense to focus my academic career on the cultural productions associated with the border, both as a physical space and as a conceptual space. I'm not exactly sure why, but I ended up specifically studying the intersection of border, music, and violence. I guess it makes sense in that the border can be a very violent space, but of course, it is much more than that. Omar and Marco's work attest to that. As for myself, I concentrated on cultural manifestations of violence. First, doing cultural criticism about border detective fictions, hard-boiled fictions of the Mexican North and its border. And then specializing on the analysis of border ballads in Spanish, corridos about undocumented migrants and about drug trafficking. The first of these themes, the lives and sufferings of immigrants, of the immigrant Mexican population in the United States, facilitated the first time I officially collaborated with Marcos ERRE. It was for a 1997 exhibition entitled 187 Pairs of Hands. The installation was a response to the very polemic Proposition 187 in California. Back in 1996, in 1997, some of you may remember it. The proposition intended to curtail the basic rights of undocumented workers and of their families in California. Marco's piece included 187 black and white photographs of 187 different Latino workers, mostly Mexican workers, taken as they were performing various jobs in California. The focus of the photographs was, of course, the hands of the workers. Marcos asked me to write the introductory text for the exhibition's pamphlet. I remember feeling very flattered by his request, because by that time he was already getting a lot of critical attention. Very well-known intellectuals were beginning to write about his work, not only in terms of art or aesthetic criticism, but in the context of cultural and social criticism in general. Also, his work was beginning to filter into my academic field. I remember presenting a paper on literary criticism at a conference at the University of California, Irvine, in the late 1990s. And when the keynote speaker gave his presentation, he devoted a good portion of it to Marcos's work. Our second collaboration was in 2008, and it was for a topic with which I was, and I'm still very familiar and interested: violence related to drug trafficking in the US-Mexican border. The exhibition was entitled The Body of Crime, and it involved music, photographs, and a video, The Black Suburban, which is hopefully what you are seeing right now in your screens. The context of the piece was a fictitious crime scene set along the United States-Mexico border. The investigation of an assassination perpetrated we assume, by the drug cartels in the borderlands. Among other themes, the video and the installation at large examined the notion of our collective participation in the drug business and its related violence. It unveiled the multiple roles that one can play, sometimes simultaneously, as all the main characters in the video were performed by the artist, Marcos. He was the sicario or assassin. He was the victim, as well as the investigator. My participation consisted of the selection or curation of 10 songs playing on the black Suburban's stereo sound equipment. The actual vehicle, the Suburban, with bullet perforations and all, was on display at the gallery. There were 10 songs, 10 border corridos or border ballads depicting historical events, but not those usually associated with history with a capital H, but what we might call microhistory or history from below. When Marcos told me that the show would take place at Art Space, a San Antonio, Texas-based arts organization, then I knew I had to include a mid-20th century ballad by the title of Carga Blanca, White Load, which narrates a drug contraband and sale in San Antonio, an exchange of either morphine or cocaine. We don't really know which, since the two substances were already favorites of drug traffickers even back then. The song narrates how the traffickers crossed the border, drove to San Antonio, and then went straight to Navidad Street. And in a Stonewall house, they delivered the drugs and were paid. Then they proceeded to return to Mexico, but when they were just about to cross Veracruz Street in San Antonio, they were ambushed and killed. According to the corrido, all the money they had just been paid volvió a su dueño otra vez, went back to its original owner. This corrido, this ballad, is the first drug trafficking corrido that has remained in popular taste, in popular culture, and that it was preserved by oral tradition. Presently, Carga Blanca continues to be recorded and performed publicly by musicians in cantinas, streets, and public plazas on both sides of the US-Mexico border. Over the years, I have continued my work documenting and uncovering pioneering cultural productions associated with drug trafficking, violence, and music in the borderlands. This in an effort to learn from our past and present, to learn about these topics that might not be very nice or quaint, but that nonetheless are very important, and that we as a society need to understand, need to better understand. Many thanks.
Well, I'm back. Now, after seeing all the images, you see, just for you to know, we knew that we were going to talk about certain works and a little bit, but we never saw each other's presentation. So we just agreed in the order. And then after Omar started, I realized that I forgot to thank to this institution, MASS MoCA, for making this dream reality, the possibility to work with my two brothers, and then make the trip, come to all the way to here with our sister, and then be able to talk about our work or influences or relationships. It's about the work we do, but it's also about the family. and then I also feel that now I belong also to this community, this family of MASS MoCA. So many thanks for that. I'm gonna try to talk about some of the works that in a way provoked or led to the exhibition that is here in MASS MoCA. And maybe we're not gonna see the pieces in actually the room if we don't have time, but I'm gonna start talking about some of the projects that really motivated me to do art. This is maybe my most important piece today. I have a real strange relationship with this piece because it's more important, but I cannot take it away from me. It's in the back of my head all the time, and everybody knows me because of this one that's called Toy and Horse. Toy and Horse is a piece that I did for Insight 97, bi-national exhibition of public art and open spaces and both sides of the border. And when I was invited, I participated in the previous edition in 1994. But when I was invited to this new edition, I selected a group of collaborators, and we started making this piece, which I relocated on the border between Mexico and the United States, right on top of the line of demarcation of the border. So if you see the building in the back, is because the building of the U.S. Customs, it's 50 yards or 50 meters back inside the United States, so they can capture people between the lines and before they cross the gates. So this is a horse that it was 10 meter high, 33 feet, and 9 meter long and 4 meter wide. And as you can see, translucent is takes on the idea of the Trojan horse of the Iliad, and it's looking in both directions. I talk around the piece, but it's a very self-explanatory piece. So I don't say much when I talk to this about this piece, because then I might ruin it. So in the bottom of the sculpture installation, there's a plate that says this is the line of demarcation between Mexico and the United States. There is, in the old configuration of the border, now we are brand new or almost new building in Tijuana San Diego border, but this is the old checkpoint. And already then there were like 50,000 people trying to cross every day. When I got my papers because when I crossed to the United States for the first time to work in construction, I had to confess that I went there and I had no papers. So eventually I got my documents, and then I came back to Tijuana for a while, and I had to cross this border and make a line of 1 hour. And then I dreamed of making a piece that people would look while they were waiting in the line, and that was the result, making that piece for the Inside event. This is the plate that I was referring to, the demarcation between Mexico and the United States. That yellow line is the place. And then this is a view from a street that are leading you to Colonia Libertad sideways. And then you can see how the piece looks with the flatness of the land, maybe, as if it is going to go across the gate, which in the Iliad is the whole purpose of making the horse very big. It was for the Trojans to demolish the entrance, and that will be possible, make possible the horse to penetrate to the other nation. So this is an interesting photograph of that. Then, as Omar mentioned, I was invited in 2000 to participate in the Whitney Biennial. And then for that, I selected a couple of pieces for the exhibition, and this is a take on Jasper Johns' flag, and I call it Stripe and Fence Forever, an homage to Jasper Johns. So in the sculptural garden of the old Whitney Museum, we allocated this flag that is there was installed on top of a square of dirt that has 4 little walls. In the front, the 2 walls that you're seeing there are brick walls. And in the back of the flag, you have other 2 walls that are made with cinder cement blocks. So it's the same dirt, and there's two different systems. And one, the bricks represent the Mexican people, the Mexican or Latin American population, and the white cinder blocks represents the American. So the idea is that when you see this flag, this fence, this metal fence from the Mexican side, it looks like a flag in a fence, and actually as an offense. And when you look at from the back, it's just a fence. It's just something that is there, only there delimitating something. So it's a matter of perspective. Then this is a small replica or maquette that is in the exhibition in MASS MoCA as part of the show. And this other piece is also here in the exhibition in MASS MoCA, but it originally was also at the Whitney Biennial, and it's a different take, the Mexican flag. I had to criticize also my own flag in order to be able to be fair by taking or making a piece about the American flag. So in this other one, in Mexican flag, what I did is I changed the seal, which is kind of problematic in Mexico. It can be a misdemeanor or worse. And what I did, I elongated the snake. This is the normal seal of the Mexican flag, and then the other one I elongated the snake, and the snake is biting back the eagle. So that was 2000. We are going back 1 year, and this is my first solo show in the American Museum. And what I did is 2 hearts, an exhibition with sculptures, mainly 2 characters, and I call it the Love's First Language. So that was another proposal of law. Remember that Carlos talked about the 187 pairs of hands being based on Proposition 187. Here we had another proposition of law in California that was aiming to limit education for kids in Spanish. They were trying to eliminate that time in which people or the kids come and then they are taught in their own language, and then they progressively start learning English. So we were opposed to that. So I created this, I wrote this story, this like a children's story in which we were all hearts before we were people, before we were in the image that we are now. So this is one of the 2 characters that were brothers. This is Acorazado, which is like a tank or a battleship. And then the other one is Sing Sing, which was inside the museum, and it's also part of the exhibition here in MASS MoCA. Sing Sing is the Latino heart. You can see through it. You can see the condition. It's like a bird cage. It plays with the idea of Sing Sing, the jail in New York. And then also the name is in English, because you are always given the name. You never name yourself. Somebody names you, and then that's what you carry the rest of your life. And the other one that is more the Anglo-Saxon heart is named Acorazado, because we name it. That's the impression it gives to us in this relationship of power, in which most of the time the weaker part is the one that is south of the border. So that exhibition also had these other 2 pieces. The one on the floor, there is 600 metal letters with 6 different alphabets, and they were thrown in. So we had words in Hebrew and Arab and Latin, and they were there, and it's called The Ruins of Babel. And this other piece in the back that it was working with water, had water running. It says language to express ourselves, heart to understand ourselves. Lengua para expresarnos, corazón para comprendernos. And it was also a heart in a way, because it had a pump. The pump was like lifting the water up, and then it was easily or constantly dripping down. So that was the first exhibition, and we have one of those pieces here in the museum. Then is the piece 187 pairs of hands that Carlos referred. This installation was displayed in the Centro Cultural Tijuana in 1996. I made, me and my team, we made a container that we displayed in the center of the exhibition space. And then around, we had the 187 photographs of 187 different persons, different people, doing 187 different jobs, all black and white, the photographs, all black and white. And then in the container, inside the container, we had 4 sculptures made with found objects or look for objects. And then that represented these sculptures, these columns represented the work of the Mexican people or Latin American people or migrants in general in California doing their work. And then and they were there in a cage, in a container, like not allowed to exist in the outside world. And then the openings that you can see in the photograph are the same size of the metal plates that were holding the photographs. So metaphorically, you could if you would apply 187 holes to this structure, you will almost destroy the structure. And this is what is happening when you have a big amount of people that is collaborating and establish a point in this society in which they are needed, and then the society depends on them, like the people that work in the agricultural fields in California or in other, like the services, stuff like that. So also you had a desk with a book, and in that book we had the information of every one of the persons. In that book, we had the information of every one of the persons. In that book, we had the information of every one of the persons. In that book, we had the information of every one of the persons. In that book, we had the information of everywhere. In that book, and also has information of everywhere. In that book, and also has information of everywhere. In that book, and also has information of everywhere. In that book, and also has information of everywhere. In that book, and also has information of everywhere. In that book, and also has information of everywhere. In that book, and also has not to me on the library. 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 Not to me on the libr And then shoot this video about shoot the black Suburbans that are in every movie. In every movie of Hollywood, whenever somebody with bad intentions shows up, or bad intentions, a group of always a black Suburban, or a group of issues happen. So in this exhibition, what happens is that I play three roles. What happens is that I play my three roles, the actor for that plays the driver that is killed by the stereo. Those shells had the names of 17 people that was killed. Shells had the names of 17 people that was killed. The Battle of El Cañaveral, 17 people that was the Battle of Sugarcane Field, in which two bands of narcos kill each other, two attack each other, and there were like police, local police and state police on both sides of the criminal groups. And the back of the wall, you have an installation made with the guns that we used to make the video. The one that says front is an AK-47 that is sliced and then intersected with the letters that made the word front. And then the ERA one on the right, it's the 9mm gun. And then we have this other one that says Miedo, and this is a shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun. And it says Frontera de Miedo. And the line in the wall is the border between Mexico and the United States. The orange markers are the most important cities. It's very interesting that when I was doing this installation or making the video in our place in San Antonio, which is very close to the border, nobody acknowledged the fact that we were in a state of war in the south of the border. And it's been just getting more and more complicated with time. Now, 12 years after that, we are in some areas of Mexico in a state of chaos. And as Juan Carlos said once to me, the border is not just the border we know. Now the border is from Chicago to Michoacan. and it's more evident every time that there's things like that. So the whole idea of the whole project is to take responsibility for whatever is happening in the country where we are living in. So I am, not precisely me, but everybody, we are the narco, we are the killer, and we are the policeman that does not do the right thing if we don't intend to be something else. If we don't intend to be clean citizens, people that really believe in the well-being of everybody by doing the right things. So we need to really, really come out and speak, and this is part of the things that I try to do with my work, and to really enhance the conscience of the social group in which I live in. You know, so these are some of the images of that. That's the Suburban, which I still own. I still drive that vehicle. I kept it, and then this is an image that really reflects the whole intention of the exhibition. There's 3 mirrors, and then on top of that, there's 3 images of the narco, then the killer, and then the police. And one says me, the other one says you, the other one says him. And when you move a little bit from the front of the image, then you are reflected, you are as a spectator. So that was a way to include everybody and take responsibility, not guilt, but responsibility for whatever is happening in our country. So that's the narco, that's the killer, and the other one is the policeman. And there's an anecdote that is very interesting, because when I arrived home and I told my father that, and I showed him the video, he was really mad at me, because he told me, "Dad," you can imagine what he said. "Dad, like Marco, you know that I always wanted to be a movie star, and I always wanted to be part of a video, and you were telling me that you did the 3 roles of the movie and I was not invited." So I don't know. And a way, I guess I took from his idea somehow, and I was very egotistical, and I made a movie for myself, but not necessarily just for myself, but for everybody, but in which I was taking the responsibility of whatever is happening in the area I live in. So that's the cop. Reflecting the Border is a piece that I did together with Margarita Garcia Esperas, an American-born scholar, an artist that lives in Frankfurt, Germany. And together we developed a project of making this structure that we were going to place at the border, where the border fence enters or penetrates the ocean in Tijuana, Baja California. It's called the area Playas de Tijuana, the beach of Tijuana. And so we erected a big mirror and put it attached to the border fence, and then we created a table. I participated more in that part of this, designing the idea of putting it at the border and then creating the object, and then trying to create this fiction of reflection. And Margarita was more into the idea of making a performance, which we did, and inviting people to eat at that table. And the point was to reflect, to make clear that even though the other side didn't want to participate with us, we can always imagine that there's this desire of participation and inclusion. So what we had was this table. At the moment, the 16 people sat at that table and we started having dinner. It looked that we had a counterpart, and we had 32 people at the table eating in a place they're not supposed to be there, or a thing they're not supposed to be there, dividing us. So I think I'll close with this, because I think we need to be open for discussions. There's many more pieces, but I have like 30 some projects, and at least 20 of them deal with the idea of border. My page is www.marcoserre.com. You can see them all there, but I don't want to eat out, which I did maybe all the time, and we need to have a couple of questions. And I'll thank you very much for your patience. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Marcos and Omar and Juan Carlos. Gosh, there's so much to unpack here. We were joking earlier that we need to take this tour on the road. So I hope we do. So we have more time to talk about all this. But before I forget, I want to tell the audience first, send in questions if you want to ask some. Otherwise, I'll start with my own. And I wanted to tell everyone that we produced a beautiful book in conjunction with the exhibition, which has been delayed like so many things because of the pandemic, but it's out and it's online. You can buy it on MASS MoCA's website. It's in both English and Spanish. It's 260 pages and many essays about the show here at MASS MoCA and Marcos's work on the border in general. And one of my favorite essays is by Omar Pimienta, which is related to my first question. I mean, it was so beautiful to hear you talk about Marcos and who he was from your perspective. And it was grounded in family, like the beginning of your presentation tonight, which I really appreciated. It just, humanizes artists to know, where you come from and really what's informing you. And it struck me when Juan Carlos was talking about all of you as border creatures. And obviously, I think, the family that you were sharing with us are those border creatures. And I'm wondering if you could maybe each say what that means to you. I mean, you can write a dissertation on that question, but what does that mean? And how are you all different because of that border changing? It was so striking to see that barbed wire fence that was nothing compared to the fence now. And I'd love to hear you talk about how that's affected your idea of being a border creature. And before I forget too, we have someone watching, Ivana Moran, if I've said your name correctly, who grew up in Colonia Libertad. So you have more family here online tonight too. So that was a long question, but Omar, do you want to start with that question, since I'm in part referencing your beautiful essay?
Thank you. I think it's interesting because I pointed out that I grew up with a different border, a more solidified border, more physical, having a triple fence, not just one fence, and obviously not just having barbed wire. Yet, since my period in which I only had a green card was really short, I became a U.S. citizen through my father that became a U.S. citizen before I was 18 years old. So I kind of inherited the U.S. citizenship. I still had to go through the process of interchanging my document. It's 19 hours. And my notion of being a border creature feels way more fluid because of that, because I grew up with the benefit and the privilege of having 2 passports. So my nationality, like Marcos, when you say like my flag and being Mexican, that solidification of one specific nationality to me feels really different. And I do believe that my experience as a son of deportees from the 60s is going to multiply, and it's multiplying currently throughout decades of deportation. And not just that, California gentrification that's pushing people to Tijuana because they can't afford rents in San Diego, or just this big demographic of people that are going to be living the border in a more intricate way. I guess that's my response.
Marcos, would you like to add to that, thinking back to those days of the barbed wire fence, and if it has changed really, or if that conceptual border doesn't need a small or big fence, it's always the same?
See, I grew up in our home base was really close to the hills. After the 3 wires, you had a buffer zone in the U.S. that with the purpose the United States left alone. They didn't build anything to be able to monitor and capture people getting across. So there was these open fields where a lot of the people in the Tijuana side took advantage of and started like building improvised soccer fields, and there were vendors in the inside there selling corn or popsicles or whatever. So we used to go, my friends, with documents or not, on bicycles and then ride or bicycles around that area, and even sometimes even getting into the 7-Eleven or whatever and buying something to drink and then coming back without going through the checkpoint. But that all happened up to a point in which we started growing a mustache. Like at around 12, 13 years of age, we crossed the border again in the same bicycles, and we were stopping, and we felt that somebody or the officer thought that we were just now becoming a threat. We were old enough to be stealing, I don't know, the jobs, or maybe like, they don't know, but we were rejected. We were told to be out of the country and then go back, and if you want to enter, we need to enter by the door. I understand the whole thing, but it was shocking for me to hear that. When my mother married my father, my mother granted the documents or got the documents to my father. So we had green cards from the beginning, but when we were 7 years old or 8 years old, me and Carlos, my father returned. There was a proposal of law that everybody needed to move from Tijuana to San Diego, and my father gave away the cards. So we had local passports for a while, you know, and then we were. That's the reason that we don't speak. I don't speak the English that I should, because I learned it later on. For some time we didn't pass, and then it was taken away, or we gave it the card, and it took years to gain it back for us to, you know. Omar got it to my father because my father was very proud when he swear or the loyalty to the flag and whatever, and then Omar got that right. And the only one in the family that is still a Mexican citizen with no U.S. citizens is myself. I have a permanent residency to the United States. So I have not much confusion in terms of what I am. I'm a Mexican that lives on the border. But I claim a lot of rights to the area that which I have lived all my life. So for me, this is my terrain. This is the land where I grew up, and I somehow be weaving every time I cross. Every time I cross, I weave constantly the border. I understand the border physically too. There's a lot of people in Los Angeles and other places that have this memory of the border when they cross, and they had these traumatic experiences. Most of the times happen to them. Just the fact of crossing illegally, whatever, and then eventually getting the papers. They don't want to come back, or they don't want to go through that thing, you know. But then it becomes a problem of identity or adaptation to the U.S. society, whatever. But for us, or for me in particular, and some of my brothers, is the fact of crossing every time and then adapting to the new reality in the relation with the country, with the United States, with the different policies that every different president comes and tries to impose. And so we constantly seeing the people that cannot cross, that is struggling to go and access to a better opportunity. So we are animals. I am an animal of the border because I'm a witness, constant witness of whatever is happening with all these people that comes. And then I was in the same position at a certain point. Not as bad as they are, of course, but at a certain point I had no the legal right to go and work in the United States. It took a while for us to really establish that, and then it's going to take more to really keep it. so I guess I decided to stay, and even though I didn't pursue my career, or I didn't follow up with my career as a lawyer, there's a part of me that still is someone that wants to deal with these issues of social justice and then the rights of the people in the world, and the erasure of borders and the understanding of each other in the very way possible as human beings. That's maybe my long perspective about being an animal of the border.
So Juan Carlos, Dr. Ramírez-Pimienta, I referred to your coining that, or not coining it, but saying it tonight, border creatures. But I'd love to hear your answer, and it must be influenced too by the fact that you're a professor of border studies. So you're feeling that identity and then also studying it. So that remove might be, it will be interesting to hear if your response is how it's different.
Well, I feel that we are, at least I am, a creation of the border. I have lived I left Tijuana many years ago, and I live in Los Angeles first, Michigan, then New Jersey, Arizona, and then back in the San Diego area. But it's like you take the border with you, and you think, or at least I think, in binary terms. I'm not sure if it's right or if it's correct or not, but it goes back to the title of Marcos's exhibition at MASS MoCA. It's difficult to refrain from this binary thinking. And when we were kids, the way in which, by which the United States was referred was el otro lado, the other side. We would say, vamos al otro lado, okay, we're going to the other side, which means visit the cousins, maybe going to the swap meet, crossing the border, but that stays with you. And it doesn't really matter that you might attain a status as a professional or a status as a member of a middle class in the United States. There's some hesitation still for me every time I cross the border, even with a US passport, and even with a credential of a big state university affiliation. There's still there's something there when you cross, and you cross legally, of course, but it's still some idea that I'm going into this country of which I'm part, a country in which I have educated a couple of generations now, but still this issue of belonging and not belonging. I think that's what the border means, and that in that sense, you take the border with you, because it is the same if you are living in Chicago or if you're living in San Diego or in Tijuana. This idea that created marked you since childhood. For us, Marcos and I, we were born and raised for a few years in 7th Street, 7 blocks from the border, and then we moved 3 more blocks, so 10th Street. But we could still listen to the immigration border patrol helicopters flying. It would seem that they would be flying over Mexico because they sounded so close, that it didn't look like 10 blocks away. But all of that marks your life. And when I teach these topics, and when I selected to teach about violence, it was also from a position of not trying to beautify or just mythify the border, because it has great things and is beautiful, but it also has a lot of problems. And to me, that was a way of working on the problems and working to understand the problems, because some of our audience might think with reason that, it is not all nostalgic, it is not all beautiful, and they would be right about that. But communication and understanding is the way for me that I visualized how to overcome our differences.
So I'd love to pick up on that and actually stick with you, Juan Carlos, and talk about the music that's come out of the violence, as you say, and the drug trade, because you say you're studying the border and not wanting to mythologize it, but there is that beauty in the music. I mean, it's a strange experience to walk into Marcos's exhibition at MASS MoCA and you hear the bullets of the video, the body of the crime that you both spoke about, along with this incredible music. And it's also very interesting to me that the music is played on both sides, this side and the other side. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and if it's at all related to what Momar was saying about what is it about Colonia Libertad that's produced these artists. I mean, is there a connection between that creation, that impulse that's there, and the impulse to make that music?
Mexican ballads, corridos, are they belong to ballads in general. back in the day, in the 16th century, 14th century, many countries produced ballads. Mexico is now, and the Mexican population in the United States, the only country or countries that still have a living tradition of balladry. In the United States, it ended maybe in the late 1900s, beginning of the 20th century, the Ballad of Billy the Kid. And Mexican balladry was born in the border, and it was born out of violence, because paradoxically, violence could be the motor for beautiful things also, like this music, because I have the same feeling, you know, the topics of this music is very violent, but at the same time, there are elements of heroicity in the same way that the Billy the Kid, for instance, or marginalized characters are mythified in the United States. There's this thing about our association with crime, our association with illegality, that makes it, for instance, that in the last 20 years, it is very difficult to find a drama series either in US networks, television networks, or platforms that does not have the anti-hero as a protagonist, and that most of society identifies with the anti-hero, although we might not say it publicly. And I'm thinking, of course, of the successful series such as The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, 24, The Blacklist. Difficult to find a successful dramatic series that doesn't have this element, because I believe that we as a society have this capacity of sharing two contrary sets of beliefs and reconciling them. I think the psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. This idea of knowing that something is bad and still, we know that Tony Soprano from The Sopranos was a killer. He was a bad person, but still we did not want anything to happen to him. So a lot of these songs about violence in the border have that element. There are redeeming qualities about some of these protagonists. They're not presented as all bad people. They have some loyalty, quality, they're brave most of the times, and people identify as listeners which the aspects that they want to identify with. For instance, for the Mexican population in the United States, a lot of these songs have to do with the notion of an empowered Mexican person. And for a population that perceives itself as to be persecuted, as it has been the case and continues to be the case in the United States, a 3-minute fantasy of this song with a powerful Mexican, invincible Mexican, you know, it might be a drug lord or whatever, it is intoxicating, and they listen to it does not mean that they act on it in the same manner in which listeners to gangster rap or rap in the United States do not engage in the activities just because they listen to the songs.
I have some comments that I could share from our audience, unless Omar and Marcos, you would want to jump in and add to that first.
Well, I just want to just a little clip, just confirming what he says or corroborating what he says. In the exhibition of the Party of Crime, I took those 3 photographs, and there's a photograph of the narco, then the hitman or sicario, and then the police. And for the stage photograph of the sicario, I made one of those mugshot graphics. They go in the back of you, and then you stand in the front, and then they measure how high you are or whatever in comparison. So I had that during the installation time, hanged in the gallery, and I was so very surprised that whenever somebody was coming into the gallery, the first thing that they would do is they would go and then stand in front of that graphic and then ask their friend to take a photograph of them. So there's this fascination in a human being with being the gangster of being an outlaw. So I decided to include that thing in the exhibition, and during the exhibition and the opening, constantly of the public that came on, started taking photographs of that. And so we are a society that really are like idolizing these criminals. Like the famous heroes of the United States, Jesse James and Billy the Kid, as he mentioned, and we have El Chapo Guzman and that. So the only comment I have of how.
Yeah, well, I was thinking myself that, I mean, you were also talking about the ballads of the migrants, and in a way it's, the narcocorridos they're also workers within a power structure, but they're also, empowered workers in a sense. But I do want to share some of the comments that the audience has written in. One person wrote, "I'm very moved by your story, brothers. I'm an immigrant from Taiwan. My two sisters who are also artists, but haven't maintained the connection and dialogue with each other that you have. Gracias." That's nice. Well, maybe you'll get in touch with your sisters. And then someone else also said they thought it was a very poetic way of looking at the border, that it's always with us. But they commented, "I lived 11 years in Spain, and I was surprised that there was no border like the one we have here," which is true. It's so incredibly visible, and but it's also such an abstraction at the same time. And this is what's so nice talking to you and getting a glimpse of like the border and the real people across the border. That sculpture that you brought here, Marcos, of fence, I thought that was very important to bring that sculpturally, painterly artwork that brings that obstacle, that thing, into our lives here, like it is in Tijuana, and makes me think of that beautiful image you showed, where Tijuana is cramped up against that fence, that object, and then on the American side, of course, it's the fields that you said people would sneak into early on to keep it invisible. But I don't know if you want to comment. You've traveled so much around the world, all of you, that if you've noticed that yourselves, what this viewer commented on, that the border here does seem quite different.
Omar, come on.
Yeah, the first time I crossed from Spain to France, I had a rented car, and all of a sudden the signs were in French, and I figured I had crossed the border, and I hadn't seen any immigration officers. There was nothing there, and that was all the way in many of the European countries. Some lines in the ground would be the indicators, and language would be an indicator, but other than that, and it was shocking. But growing up in the border, you really don't understand. When you grew up, I had a really happy childhood. It wasn't to me something until art came into my life. Marco started making work. Insight brought many artists from many parts of the world that were shocked, and I was like the kid that would guide them to Colonia Libertad's wall, and they would be fascinated. I'd be like, what is it so special about this thing? And I actually took someone else's gaze and capacity to look at the wall that kind of opened my eyes.
I believe that this might be the most asymmetric border in the world. That also makes a big difference because the asymmetry between Spain and France is not that as much, by any means, as the asymmetry in many terms, economic terms, certainly between the US and Mexico. And actually, when you go from Spain into France, sometimes you also see a mix in the signs, in Catalan, that seems to be a mixture of Spanish and French also. Like you start seeing salida, which is exit in Spanish, and then you see sortida, which is Catalan for exit, and then you see sortie, which is French for exit. But there's like this in between. And also the US-Mexican border, we should not forget that is a border taken by war. That's also an important element. And it has been instilled in the Mexican memory. you know, the Mexican-American War. It's a border that was created artificially and by force.
And
So
also,
so you try to take up to the last inch of Mexican land you can.
but it's also interesting that I guess that like the first border that was really analyzed or people study this border of Tijuana San Diego because it's the first one, and they started like being so contested and so problematic. You know, there's this thing of Tijuana as being this social laboratory. And many of the things that happen now in the rest of the world happened there like 20 years ago, and it's still happening new things. And as I mentioned, referring to what Carlos said, is the border now is wider, but it's not fair to compare a border like this with France and Spain, but it's fair to compare it to the one between Africa and Spain, or Africa and Italy, you know, or Syria and Turkey or wherever. These other places where there is an economical disadvantage because the European nation, they raised their borders and united themselves as an economical bloc to protect their own interests. But they don't allow Eastern nations that are not under NATO or under the European nations. So it's complicated. It's all about money. It's all about interest, and it's also about countries that are always with the intention of really expand their borders in many ways, economical or military or whatever. You know, there's a different notion of understanding for us, for Mexican people, Latin American people. The idea of frontera or border is a line, a rigid line that makes a demarcation between one side and the other. But in the U.S., we have, and I say we have because they have or you have another idea with another word that is called frontier. And then for us, the word frontera is also the same borders and fronteras that ends here start there. But for the U.S. and for some imperialistic countries, is a frontier is a land of opportunity. It's a possibility of reaching or obtaining or winning as a space is the last frontier. So it's there for grabs. Who is going to get it first? You know. So there's always this intention of maybe gaining a little bit more. And then so since we have this memory that we lost half of the territory, 55%, as a matter of fact. So we are somehow like the little dog that is kicked every once in a while when tries to eat a piece of meat on the floor or whatever. So you are it's a different way of understanding the border, because for me or for some people in my generation think that when we cross the border, we are going to the land that used one time belongs to us. And then for the people on the other side, many times you are coming to a place that does not belong to you anymore. So that creates a conflict.
I actually very personally experienced that asymmetry that Juan Carlos spoke about in this very literal way, and that when I was first visiting Marcos' studio in Tijuana from San Diego, I was driving a car and not paying attention, and I accidentally got into Mexico. There was no border guard. There was nothing. I suddenly just ended up in Mexico. That doesn't happen on the other direction, and I found that to be a fascinating introduction to that border and that asymmetry and that power dynamic that you're talking about. But sadly, we only have a few more minutes, and I just wanted to share another comment from the audience. Someone said they still remember the horse, Marcos. It was a boom on the border. They say we all wondered who had made it and started to build spectacular stories about that horse. It marked an era. I love it that it spawned more stories from, it came from the Iliad and it created more stories. And then someone else also wrote, this is beautiful. It says, we're like a tree and our roots were left in Mexico and the branches are here with us across the border and al otro lado. But as you said, Marcos, it's not even, what does that mean across the border? People are living in, we're living in land that, well, not me, but many Americans are living in land that was, of course, once Mexico's. So, but I want to end it with you all and not my voice. So I'd love to just let you have another moment to say something before we close out. And and if you want to leave us with some beautiful little nugget. That's a lot of pressure.
Not that, but I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity to have us here and to reflect on these memories and experiences. Thank you very much, really.
Yeah, same here. I would like to thank you all first, the audience as well for clicking in, and I wanted maybe to go a little bit back to that. What is it to be a border creature? And Carlos mentioned that it would be we're going to El Otro Lado, and it just made me remember then when we would take a vacation back to Tecolotlan, we used to say like we're going to Mexico. So is the El Otro Lado the U.S. and then for me at least, Mexico was going to my parents' hometown. So that border space was something really interesting for me. Thank you all.
I want to thank again the MASS MoCA Museum, you and all the team. And I also want to mention again, I don't know if I don't remember if I mentioned it before, but there's 3 of us now in the presentation, but in the trip is also my sister, Nora Teresa Ramírez-Pimienta, a bright and very loving sister that has been taking care of her family and for my father and all of us, you know. So she's with us. She's as creative and as smart, or even more than us. But just for the topic of the exhibition, she was not included in this. But like there's a piece, a beautiful piece, maybe the best piece in the exhibition. There is the 4 uniforms of inmates in orange that she made with her own hands as a request from myself, and she had some design implications in the pieces as well. So she's in the show. She's with us, and I want to just recognize her and the love, the fountain of a lot of the love that we share as a family. And for me, that is a very important part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I wanted to remind everyone that the exhibition is on through October 24th, and you can see that that piece that Marcos made with Teresa, Orange Country. So please come back and see the show again or for the first time if you haven't yet seen it. But then it's also lives on in this beautiful book that's now online. And I do hope that these 3 brothers, you go on tour and there's another chance to see you all together.
Muchas gracias.
Okay. Good night, everybody.